My father gave me a fountain of building blocks. As I smiled, he whispered in my ear, "They all belong to you." Then with a head nod, he ushered me to go build. At that time, I did not realize that rather than toy blocks, I had been given building blocks. He said, "Go build," but I heard, "Go play." It wasn't until I turned 21 that I saw the need to examine my blocks. Upon examination, I ran to my father in repentance. I understood the sacrifice he had made for my building blocks. I had forfeited, but he saw fit to restore me. With this in mind, I chose to put it in hand. With my intentions rooted in the destination, I picked up my first building block and placed it upon my foundation. The base of the building was so close to the substructure that my hand was not tempted to shake. Through my father's eye stature, I looked down upon my unfinished framework. I knew not what my skeletal structure would support and enclose, but I knew it would be to the glory of my father. My fountain sprang with so many blocks to pick from. My hands would pass up blocks in search of the right block. When I became tired of searching, I would look to my father and he would whisper, "Keep looking." Each block was needed, but there was a sequence to their placement. Once I was convinced that I had lost a building block, so I used another as a replacement. From there, I tried to continue the sequence. The uneven platform buckled under the weight. I would have lost the whole right side of the building if my father did not extend his hand. He taught me how to create. He said, "In the beginning, before there were block in hand, there was the Word. The Word was made flesh so that you could have block in hand. So when you lift your hand, never forget to praise the Word." He showed me how to steady my hand by removing fear from my mind. I would labor past midnight. He would come touch my hand, and I knew it was time to turn off the light. I'd ball up beside the construction site and fall asleep on the chest of my foundation. When I wanted to rest, he would remind me that it was not the seventh day. My heart no longer let me play. I wept some days from blistered hands. The wooden blocks would rub against my flesh, forming pockets of matter. I told myself the only thing that really mattered was the completion of my composition. I ate the meal of a construction worker, for that was the only diet that could sustain me. I had tunnel vision that required no supervision, so my father played songs for me. I would hum along as the song strummed about my inheritance of his glory. At times my hands would cramp and sweat under the weather condition. Vacant became the season where my hands deserted the act of composing. Soul was under attack. I could not fathom the thought of working. Father chose to react to the thought of protecting. With his sword, he showed me the boundaries of my enemy, stayed by my side while I was drowning, gave me new life when I stopped breathing. Then we went back to building. Fountain streamed new blocks that weighed more than I could carry. That's why we went back to building. He kept guiding me to place blocks on block pedestals with base molding. I inquired about his adjudication, and he took my eyes in his eyes, giving me the stature of his vision. Columns we were building, carnal chains we were breaking off my mind. I had to find the next block to this magnificent sequence. Could I build faster or more efficient if I was his student? My father became my professor. As I surrendered my hands, he declared the plans. His vision no longer whispered in my ear, but shouted in my heart. I gave up being smart so I could be cloaked within his humility. He offered me the blueprint for my building. Upon viewing it, became overwhelming to contemplate the price I would have to pay if I wanted to accurately complete the building. He said, "I know it can be chilling, but it's also fulfilling. All you have to do is just keep building." He placed a foreign block in my hand. My thought was to drop it. My soul despised the way it made me adjust the posture of my hand. Fortunately, he saw my plan and reminded me of the power of my hand. I went from carrying 1 block with 2 hands to carrying 4 blocks with 2 hands. Some days I had to soak my hands in milk and honey. I said, Father, I thought milk was for drinking. He said, drinking hydrates, soaking saturates. I said, Father, you poured water instead of milk and honey. He said, no, I served you the sweetest nourishment that sustained the only begotten. I said, Father, why does the milk and honey seem to run? He said, it's living water, my son. I said, Father, I am not your son. He said, in him you are one, and then he pointed to the sun. I said, Father, my work has just begun. He said, indeed, my son, yet the battle has already been won. So I took my eyes off the harshness of the sun, and I placed them on the work to be done while I strove to lay blocks to the pace of my father's drum. He demanded orders like a sergeant, rain hope like a cloud, love like a mother laughed with me like a child, healed like a doctor gave, wisdom like a god, scolded like fire, praised like trumpet, rewarded like river, molded like potter, listened like ear. He took me across a pier, allowed me to experience the atmosphere of the things that he holds dear. Silence was the only thing I could speak while he showed me glimpses of wisdom's glory. He led me back across the pier, handed me a block and said, you will visit again, my dear. In the meantime, go build what you have seen. My soul wanted to scream. How can I build what I have seen when what I have seen is absent of unclean? I'm still trying to purge what is obscene. He said, my son, the blood is a screen, a sieve, a mesh-like device used to separate clean from unclean. Let the blood do its work and you do yours. Of course, my only response was to keep building. I wondered if this building had a ceiling. I wondered why my rooms had no doors. I wondered when we would start working on the decor. Father said, you're getting off course. I said, I'm only asking. He said, no, you're only wandering. I accepted his response with no understanding and went back to building. Oh, how I would regret my lack of understanding, my lack of truly asking instead of wondering. Time went by and my construction began to set high. It was clear that I was willing to comply with the completion of the building. The more my father kept consecrating me, the more I kept building. Sometimes it felt like he was shading me, but I knew he was only empowering me, so I chose to allow him to form me into the image I ought to be. Love oxygenated me, caused me to think beyond me. Sometimes I had to stop and cry in order to keep moving. One day while building, I started wondering, what am I building? I started wondering, is this about building or laboring? I started wondering if my laboring was in vain. The pain of my wondering kept me wondering until my hands started wandering. My hands wandered, drifted, wandered, deviated, wandered, roamed down from the construction site. I lost sight of the value of my building. The pain of my wondering could not explain the purpose of my laboring. My hands cracked at the thought of wasting a decade to laboring and building. My hands shook with sadness and frustration, and then I covered my hands in abrasions. As I knocked down my construction, I watched the blocks of my conception fall to the chest of my foundation. With no hesitation, I denounced laboring and building while wondering if I had ever truly heard and moved to the rhythm of my father's drum. Unconcerned about the destruction my hands made, for they no longer were governed. I wondered if I ever knew his plans. I wondered if I ever understood the sequence to my building. Life became chilling and I refused to keep laboring and building. I finally awoke with my hands and community dismayed. Then my wondering turned to pondering my destruction, and I found myself ashamed. How did I become so blind that I banned my hands to shine? My hands were confused yet remorseful. I repented for the act of destroying, but still declined the act of rebuilding, still felt bewildered on why my laboring left me wondering instead of manifesting. Finally, I understood why my father said, wondering leads to wandering. But still I repelled the thought of laboring. My hands started caving in, and I welcomed their collapse, perhaps. Sinful hands like mine should never be caught in building. Why did I knock down my building when I could have just stopped building? That would have left some form of savoring. I kept ignoring my father's whispering. He kept saying, in him you are one, let the blood do its work and you do yours. As I balled up on the chest of my foundation and continued to ignore his heartbeats, my eyes could not help but see pavement. While I was laboring and building, my father must have been paving. With intrigued, caving hands, I followed the pavement, and it led me to the backside of my building. In all, my arms raised, open hands, while my legs buckled me down to my knees. And then I heard my father speak. In the beginning, before there were block in hand, there was the Word. The Word was made flesh so that you could have block in hand. So when you lift your hand, never forget to praise the Word. My eyes started to expand. Across the backside of my building, it was my own cross we were building. I felt like shielding my eyes. I could not help but despise my attempt to demolish my own cross. This cross scenery must be false. Who knew I was building a cross? Father whispered, I showed you the blueprint to your building. I whispered, how is this still standing? How could this still be remaining even after the slaying?
One. A woman who flower petals invite the world to sing, once offered me rest, wisdom, joy, peace, trust, faith, and love under her leaves. With her speech she would offer my soul food to eat, and if I ever wept, she unknowingly would remind me that life was still sweet. The heap of her nectar so deep, my feet would leave her precious family, wondering what sacred family the world had for me. As she bloomed flowers and crossed valleys, my heart would leap, for she was a chief. Indeed, this was an honorable friendship offered to me, and everything offered must be received. I received this offering, making a monument out of its beauty. But cloudy became my eyes, and filthy became my heart, as I parted the sea of friendship and community by betrayal and deceit. Trading glory for carnality, I broke the sister decree. I slept with the man that she holds as king, her covenant, her supreme. My falling blocks were like sharp piercing beams. Another friend who carried the name of an herb was also impacted by this deceit, for I had broken his friendship of trust and community. Immunity from these sharp falling black beams I could not plead, but only weep, for I had destroyed my decade of reformation, abstinence, and integrity.